My name is Katherine Pakradouni. I'm a horticulturist, an educator, and a consultant on urban habitat restoration projects in the city of LA. And I have my own business, and as my day job, I'm the nursery manager growing the native plants for the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. So for those of you who are familiar with that project, it's a crossing that's in construction currently to span the 101 freeway to allow for the connectivity of the Santa Monica Mountains and the Simi Hills for wildlife to be able to thrive and survive. And so biodiversity and animals and the inclusion of all life in the way that we design our spaces and our cities is something that's really, really important to me personally. So for those of you who are or are not aware, we are located in a biodiversity hotspot. And in order to be designated a biodiversity hotspot, and there are only 36 in the whole world that are designated this, you have to have, I believe it's more than 1,500 vascular plants in your region that are unique to that region. They occur nowhere else. They're endemic. And so if we were to lose them, they'd be irreplaceable. So it has a lot of diversity of plant life and therefore animal life, and is really, really valuable for conservation for that reason. The other thing that designates it a hotspot is that we are losing it very fast. More than 70% of the natural vegetation of the area is already gone. And so it's a biodiversity concern and a conservation concern area that we live in. Hence the little wonderful natural environment kind of goal that you guys set forth for West Hollywood, being that we nurture green spaces, biodiversity, and wildlife habitat. That's an incredible goal to be reached for a number of reasons, but one of which is we talk a lot about economy. We talk a lot about, just walking through this incredible building and seeing showrooms and seeing furniture and seeing art and seeing coffee shops and all the things that we love to do and how we like to engage in the world, it takes for granted that we have a livable planet. And the economy will suffer when our planet suffers. The economy suffers when the environment suffers. And so we have environments in our cities that look a lot like this. And so there's a lot of challenges in terms of ecosystem. An ecosystem is a complex interaction between organisms and other organisms and organisms with the natural environment, and it's this web of life. And so everything's an ecosystem. There's no such thing as this is a city and this is nature. Everything's nature, it's just some are really dysfunctional. And so what we are seeing here in this slide, when it rains, normally water gets to go into the ground and get absorbed, and tree roots can use it and plant roots can use it, and those plants and trees thrive, which bring wildlife, and you have that interaction. When water hits the ground in this kind of impermeable environment, it shoots out to a storm drain, goes out into a channelized river system, and shoots out into an ocean where it mixes with salt water and becomes unusable. The vegetation in this area is also not indigenous to the region, things that were imported, so they have less of a value for wildlife in terms of food. The little bit of vegetation that you do see here, like this ficus in the top right, is dense enough to support nesting birds. But birds fledge the nest. Birds don't fly out of the nests. Unlike cartoons, they like to show you that birds fly out of the nest and learn to fly out of the nest. They actually fly from the ground up. And so if you have a nest of baby birds in this tree, what they're going to do is they're going to fledge the nest, hop on the ground for about a week or two while their parent shows them how to forage for food, how to stay safe from predators, how to fly. And that's a process that they do from the ground. If a baby bird fell out of this nest, what are its likely chances of survival? Pretty darn slim. This is not only exclusionary to a lot of forms of wildlife, it's downright hostile. And so what we have is also exclusionary because you're not seeing deer. Of course, there's no deer in the city anymore. There were deer here. There were all manner of wildlife. There was lizards here. There's birds of different kinds. There are also birds that don't nest in trees. They nest in shrubs or they nest on the ground. Definitely excluded from this environment. So we've talked a lot about humans feeling welcome the human habitat that includes other forms of life as well. So what is a fully functioning and really healthy ecosystem look like? It looks like highly vegetated, dense stands of native trees and shrubs, native being plants or vegetation and trees that have been around for thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years in this region. So they've co-evolved with the wildlife here, much more attractive to them in the form of food. They're the larval food source for various insects and butterflies. We all know about the monarch butterfly and the importance of milkweed. That includes all insects. They have host plants. And then obviously the insects are the first of the whole food chain that feeds every other animal above them. And in turn, we have an ecosystem underground. So when plants and trees are growing and they're photosynthesizing, they're sending out sugars to solicit beneficial bacteria and fungi, which are in turn creating this really healthy, robust ecosystem underground of microorganisms that are restoring our soils. Natural leaf litter is allowed to accumulate on the ground. We don't blow it away every time. Oh, there's a dead leaf. It looks ugly. We're going to blow it away. We let it decompose so that it's releasing nutrients, which can then feed that system again. So we have this complex interrelated web, and we have the ability to create these systems. And if we can't convert the former slide that you saw, which is that cityscape, we can at least identify locations within these cityscapes to create these kind of pocket ecosystems. And so enter Akira Miyawaki. Akira Miyawaki was a Japanese botanist and an ecologist who developed this method of rapid forest creation, which became known as the Miyawaki method. And the Miyawaki method involves the randomized planting of indigenous trees and shrubs in 4 distinct layers, where they're planted very close together. They're kind of forced to compete for sunlight, and so they grow much faster. They shade the ground faster. Their leaf litter provides nutrients back into the forest. And so you have that really natural cycling process, and it uses strictly trees and shrubs from the region where it's being planted. And so it has, in comparison to, say, plantation-style forests, which are all monocultures, this is a much more higher level of carbon sequestration method and a much better biodiversity benefit that you get from this kind of a naturalized forest. So to give you an example of what those look like, the one on the left is the forest at planting. So literally starting with really tiny locally grown saplings planted by the community. And on the right, you see the forest 10 years later. Likewise, this is a 40-year-old forest that he installed in it, as you can see, a highly industrialized area, meant to combat some of this pollution and that you're seeing from these the steel, I guess these Nippon Steel works. And the cool thing about this method is that it is scalable. And so the way that you do it on maybe 10 acres is the exact same method that you can do it on a 1/4 acre, 1,000 square feet, 500 square feet. And so it's the same method. So what you're seeing here is a pocket forest or a tiny forest using the Miyawaki method planted in the Netherlands. And so that's another term, microforest, pocket forest, tiny forest. Right now, the State Assembly is trying to make it possible for CAL FIRE to give out grants for nonprofit environmental organizations to create pocket forests, because until then, it's always been about tree planting, trees with nothing below it, trees with turf grass below it, so that nothing can actually survive and thrive in the understory. So I used to have chickens. I don't know if any of you have had chickens. I don't know if chickens are a thing in West Hollywood, but chickens eat everything in sight. And so we had vegetation, then we had chickens, and then all we had were trees and dirt. And then I also had dogs. And so birds, year after year, would nest in the trees, fledge to the ground, hop around, and my dog would kill them. And that happened over and over until I realized something was really, really unbalanced about this ecosystem for that to keep happening. And all it literally took was densifying the planting and providing a variety of different heights and shrubs so that animals could find that kind of protection. And that solved the problem. So another example of a Miyawaki forest planted in India. And so it's planted pretty extensively in India. It's planted in parts of Europe, as I mentioned. It's been planted on the East Coast in the United States, and a little bit just started on the West Coast. However, it's only very, very recently that it's been started in an area that is drought prone, of a hot Mediterranean style climate like we have in Southern California. And so I got the very good pleasure and privilege of being able to design and adapt this method for LA. So I got to design the very first small Miyawaki microforest and adapt this method to our particular climate and the natural vegetation and native plants of our region. And so you can see that's where it's located. It's across the river in a park in Griffith Park. And across that river, on the other side, is the rest of Griffith Park, which if any of you go out of West Hollywood, or you go out hiking, or you go out to Griffith Park or other natural areas, we have a shrub-dominated chaparral-style landscape in most areas. And then where we have trees, we are an oak forest woodland. So part of West Hollywood historically is that oak forest / woodland environment. And we don't have a big diversity of trees in Southern California, but the ones that we do have, as far as our oak trees, are keystone species, meaning without them, the ecosystem would collapse. They have so much benefit to life, from being a host plant to a couple hundred species of butterfly and moths, and then the birds and the lizards and the squirrels, and then the acorns, and then deer eat the acorns, and a mountain lion can eat that deer. It literally starts from this one tree, and you have the entire food chain supported. And so I got to adapt this method to make it more in tune with our natural environment here by making it a little bit more shrub-dominated versus tree-dominated, creating a little bit of a spacing difference in the spacing. But other than that, it's the same 4 layers, mulch layer, allowing for natural leaf litter, dense planting so that they get full fast and outcompete the weeds fast, and also making sure that we've collected seeds from the local region, incorporated the community in the growing of the plants and the planting of the plants. So we have these were grown at a city nursery, actually, in Griffith Park. And then we planted this forest with the help of volunteers and the LA Zoo's Conservation Committee. This was it at planting, a very, very simple design. Just a circle, a little pathway down the middle, and it's only 1,000 square feet, or maybe a little less if you take the pathway out of it. This is it 3 months later. This is it 11 months later. This is it 14 months later. Now, 14 months later, we're in the middle of summer. And so if anybody's familiar with what plants and trees do in areas that get a lot of snow, they look like they die, right? They shut down because it's snowing, and everybody expects that trees aren't supposed to have leaves when it's snowing, and plants are not supposed to be alive when it's snowy. And so we don't have snow here, but we have that summer drought period. And that's where some of our species will do a little bit of that shutdown. So instead of shutting down in winter, they kind of shut down in late summer. And then what happens in places with snow is springtime is when things start waking up. In our case, in Southern California, winter is when things start waking up. So this is at 21 months. So that what you saw before got some rain and now is fleshed out and really green and rich again. And so what's even more exciting than all of this is the amount of life that this forest on only 1,000 square feet has attracted and supported from the get-go. We have all forms of life that not only are utilizing the forest itself, but are able to complete their full life process. So again, we talk about, we want to support birds, and I'm going to throw out bird seed, and I'm going to have a few birds. That's not the same as a bird being able to forage for its own food, nest, have a successful bird babies that come from that nest, and that get to repeat that cycle. And so we have this full life cycle completion with a number of species, starting from insects, because those are the fastest, But even within 6 months, we had western fence lizards already breeding inside the forest. So we had baby lizards scurrying around within 6 months. And the most exciting, we also had ground squirrels. That doesn't sound very exciting to most people because they're like, ground squirrels are pests. So ground squirrels are not pests, but most people would treat them that way because they create a burrow in the ground. And it seems like, they're destroying our landscape. But what we're trying to model is a live and let live kind of strategy of, everything belongs in this particular ecosystem. And I'm really glad that we did, because in the top right little bubble, we have a very interesting resident, which is multiple western toads. The western toads came from the LA River. They, for those of you who are aware, the eggs are laid inside water. They come out as tadpoles. Their legs come out, their arms come out eventually, and then they start hopping around. And they made the choice to leave the river, even though there's quite a few land masses within the river. They made the choice to leave the river, come up the concrete embankment, cross a concrete walking path, down a dirt hill, cross a horse trail to live inside this 1,000 square foot forest. Why? Because it had shelter from the heat and the dryness by going inside the ground squirrel burrows. So a completely unrelated species has taken up habitation in the ground squirrel burrows, and the forest itself provided all the food it needed in the form of insects. So it has completely supported number of insects, small mammals, and lizards and amphibians in a very, very small footprint. So what we are hoping to do is model more of these throughout the region in different contexts and scenarios. So for instance, in the fall, we have the first microforest around the same size as the one you saw that we did in Griffith Park being installed in a school campus, and an LAUSD school campus. And with the goal that we're also going to tie it up with a kind of ecological curriculum for students. And then we also have another one that's going to be 11 times the size of the one you just saw, the biggest one that we've planted yet. That's going to be in Northeast LA at a park, a public park. And that's also going to incorporate professional development for environmental orgs who already do environmental work in LA. And ultimately also want to loop in the growing aspect. So I work also with a nonprofit called Grown in LA, and we're about to start working on and release a curriculum for how to pop up your own native plant nursery, whether it's in a drive yard, a backyard, a public property, a park, etc., and start to grow these plants from local seeds, engage the local community, and then be able to plant these and have them be these environmental wildlife refuges, but also educational, eco-educational spaces. So you can couple this kind of thing. One of the benefits from a human perspective is, number one, there's an amazing sense of peace when you're around one of these spaces. When something is this vibrant with life, you're attracted to it, you feel good around it, and it gives you a sense of like a deep appreciation. The other thing is also just the fun of it. There's apps like iNaturalist, where you can look and find and take pictures of wildlife and start to map out what's in your neighborhood. I checked the iNaturalist observations for West Hollywood. The top 2 species that are that have been observed by community members in West Hollywood are 2 non-native species. We have one is the eastern fox squirrel, which is a transplant from the East Coast, which has kind of displaced our western gray squirrel. And then the other one is just the European honeybee. And so there's hundreds of species of native bees, none of which even made the top 10. Whereas when you get one of these spaces, you start to see life you didn't even know existed. And so it's really, really engaging and really fulfilling on a deep level to know that you're creating a space that's not just inclusive for human beings, but is inclusive for all life. And so if you want to learn any more, I do have a website that I created to teach people how to install these themselves. And thank you very much for listening.
Katherine, thank you so much. It's amazing learning this morning. I'm so enjoying this conversation and discussion that we're going to hopefully move into. I think especially with respect to trees and our sort of local ecology, it's an imperative that we start to think about how to integrate some of this nature back into the city. Over the last decade plus, our tracking is showing that the temperatures have gone up over 1.5 degrees in this local area, in part because of a lot of loss of our canopy trees. And it's a number of challenges out there, not only with development, but with some of our outside agencies. And there's a lot of pressure on staff right now to be removing trees. And so, this is the creative city, and we've got to figure out ways to make sure that we maintain that balance. So this pocket forest or microforest idea is such a great way of thinking beyond just trees into a complete ecology. So thank you, Katherine, for bringing that to us.